apologise for it being slightly warm in here. I have opened all the doors, so hopefully we'll get a little bit better through it. It might cool down as we go through. But also, it's absolutely fantastic to see so many people here, but these events aren't free to put on. They are free, we make them free for everybody to attend, because our aim is to make them accessible for as many people as possible. But it does cost us a bit of money to put them on. So if you enjoy yourself and you want to see more of these events coming up, it would be absolutely fantastic if you could drop a loonie or two in the donation box just outside the door. Every penny you get really helps to keep these events going. So thanks very much. And now, the main event, what you've been waiting for. Here's Passage of Adventure. So this is the two Australians, Lucy, Graham and Mahilde Gordon, and they've just come back from a massively epic 2,100 kilometre kayak from where they kayaked from Alaska down to here, while doing it single-use plastic free, which is also incredible. So I'll pass you over to them, and they will tell you all about their incredible trip.
So we also want to start by acknowledging that we're fortunate to gather on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, to acknowledge their elders, past, present and emerging, to acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done in countries like Canada and back home in Australia, to work to a better future forwards from the histories of our nations. We also want to thank Ava for being here and making this an accessible event. It's awesome that anybody can come along and be able to access events like this, and also to Oceanwise for hosting us, because all we had to do was come and plug our thing in. They did all the other stuff. Yeah. So it's really amazing to have that kind of support for this kind of event. Also, hello to YouTube. We're not going to be able to move around the stage. We're usually very active people, so if we look a little bit still, it's because there's people on the internet watching. Mostly our families in Australia. So as Ruth said, I'm Mahilde and this is Lucy. And we didn't quite make it to 2,100 kilometres, but we did just finish kayaking 2,042 kilometres, which means that we discovered the meaning of life on the way. So I think that's pretty cool. We started our trip in Juneau in Alaska, and some of you might have seen our talk before we set sail, so welcome back if you're in the room. And we kayaked for 89 days, and we finished on the 4th of August in Victoria on Vancouver Island. We did the whole 3-month trip without using single-use plastics as much as we could. We participated in beach cleanups along the way, and we ran beach cleanups after the event and before the event, and we also tracked all of the marine debris that we found along the way on our Garmin InReach. We ran a workshop with some 15-year-old girls who were very inspiring in Tribune Bay along the way, and we also ran some public talks, and most of them were completely sporadic, and the locals asked us to talk in the community, so that was really, really cool. We're back, safe and happy. So for those people who didn't have the privilege of joining us at our previous talk here at the Aquatic Cafe, we also checked in from Prince Rupert and did a webinar there halfway through our trip. We just want to let you guys know why we did this and what you might have missed out and what we're not going to cover tonight. So we did this trip originally because we wanted to have an adventure, to do something fun, to do something we weren't sure we could achieve, and to get out into a part of the world we'd never seen before. But because of who we are and our deep passion for the ocean, it kind of felt a little selfish going off to go kayaking for 3 months and leaving the world to its own devices without taking our share of the responsibility, which was why we found a way to have an impact with this trip, and that's why we decided to fundraise, to do something fun, to something we weren't sure we could achieve plastic free, and to get out into a part of the world we'd never seen before. But because of things that we've covered in our previous events is like the training we had to do, the planning that went into planning this expedition, the failures we had along the way doing that, the surprises why we found sponsorship, we had a whole heap of that stuff. So that's why if you get to the end of this, do like a 1, 2 second trip, and you want to get out and do some other crazy world and then sing around. But because of those things that we've covered in our previous events, like the training we had to do, the planning that went into planning this expedition, the failures we had along the way doing that, the surprises why we found a way.
So, yeah, there's a bit that we won't cover tonight.
You get to the end of this,
It's very fast paddling in less than an hour. We're going to do our best, but we're allowing a fair bit of flex around.
But because of those things that we've covered in our previous events, like the training we had to do, the planning that went into planning this
we wanted to share with you
milestones doing
and
that,
not knowing
the
that
surprises why we found a way.
So where we started was in Glacier Bay.
Yeah,
there's a bit that we won't cover tonight.
You get to the end of this,
Very fast all the way down
here.
here in less than an hour. We're going to do our best, but we're allowing. This was our first
because of the things that we've covered in our previous events, like the training we had to do, the planning that went into
we wanted to share with you friendships that go through there and fun times. Then there we started was in Glacier Bay. There's a bit that we won't cover tonight. I'm going to kill you on these islands here. And then there's Cape Caution, where the same thing happens, and it goes from a very deep part of the ocean to a very shallow part of the ocean very suddenly. And so the swell beating against the rocks there is infamous, and even normal boaters have trouble for it. And then this is the Dent and the Kilometre Rapids here, which the water moves there through those channels, which are very narrow, at about 14 nautical miles per hour, which is like 30 kilometres an hour that water's moving through there, and it creates whirlpools and like grade 2 whitewater rapids in the strength of the tide. So you have a 30-minute window to cross in the slack. So you have to time it perfectly, otherwise
and we timed it during the full moon, where 18 to 20 foot tides were rushing through those narrow passages.
Because we like a challenge.
Yeah.
And we didn't stop at a pub for a beer.
No.
So there's some of
like
our
grade 2
major
whitewater rapids
milestones, and we'll talk about them in this talk, but we just wanted to give you an idea of where those milestones were and how far we paddled. So it's very hard to give you an idea of the size of this, but yeah, we started way up here, and last week we finished in Victoria. So that's where we've started and come from.
So what was it like starting in Glacier Bay? It felt like we were totally thrown into the deep end, which is exactly what we wanted. So we come from the tropics, where the water is about 35 degrees Celsius, and in Glacier Bay it's at about 5 degrees Celsius, and the outside temperatures are often even less. So we learnt a lot of things in the first week. One of them was how to deal with our dry tops and not feel like they were strangling us all the time, and learn to love them. So our dry tops were sponsored by Cocotat, and they kept us warm and dry when it was raining, pretty much 24/7 except for that photo. And it was just incredible. We were in our tiny little kayaks, and around us were just these massive mountains. And for the first couple of days, it was really trippy. Our islands back home are quite flat. So to see these ginormous snow-capped mountains coming out of the ocean was a little bit disorienting. We kind of felt like the mainland was all around us. So that was very exciting. A massive challenge for us was actually, learning to camp with bears. We saw 16 bears in our whole 3 months. Most of them were in Alaska.
Most of them were grizzly bears.
Most of them were grizzly bears, and all of them were from our kayak, except for Lucy's experience, which she will delve into a bit later. But we were told, when we checked in at Bartlett Cove, we were told by the rangers, if you see signs of bears on your campsites, keep paddling and go to another camp.
Not a thing.
It's impossible. On our first night, we rocked up to the first beach, and we saw tracks. We saw teeth marks and claws on trees and logs on the beach. We saw massive bear poops that were like steaming still. And so that was our first camp, so we decided to keep on paddling. We get to the next beach. Same situation, just without the claw and the teeth marks. So we thought, yep, that looks good. This is great. By the end of the week in Glacier Bay, we decided that if we rocked up at a camp and there wasn't a bear in our camp, that was great. And that did happen on a number of occasions. We'd kayak for an entire day, maybe 8 to 10 hours, get to camp starving, and then there's just this grizzly bear sitting on the beach just chilling, and we'd have to just keep on going. So that was a massive challenge. Another one for us was we were sponsored Baril Design kayaks, which were amazing. But in the first week, in the first 2 weeks, our rudders actually broke. The braces, so the foot pedals that you brace on, that although we didn't have very rough weather, it just meant that you couldn't like brace with your feet at the same like distance away. So you'd end up with really bad back pains, and it was quite a struggle, especially when you have waves coming in from 45 degrees, so you're trying to kayak and the waves are going like this, and you're like, and so, yeah, that was a fun experience, but we luckily had made some friends in Juneau who were very hospitable, and they let us use their backyard to fix our kayaks, which is amazing. So
It was something that they'd warned us about.
yeah, it was something that they'd warned us about. These are the older models, and they fixed this in the newer models, so that was great. One other thing we learnt about was isostatic rebound. So the glaciers in Glacier Bay have been receding quite drastically over the last few decades, which means that the weight of the glaciers is being lifted off the land, and in turn the land is actually lifting by like a couple of inches a year, which doesn't seem like much, but when you have charts, marine maps that were made and printed in the 80s or the 90s, you often think that you can go through tiny passageways, and in reality, that is land. And so there are a few times where we thought we could make it through some small gaps in the land, and in fact, we had to unload our kayaks, carry the kayaks across the barnacles and rocks, load them up again, and continue on our ways. So yeah, that was a lot of fun. We learned a lot of lessons, and it was definitely like a massive change in what we'd experienced previously in our kayaking, but it was also epic in every single way, and we wouldn't have changed a single thing. Yeah.
And we definitely had to embrace this. This is one of my favorite pictures down here. It's like,
Yeah.
although people who think that we know what we're doing, but yeah, we just have a shark fin on our head, and we're hoping for the best. And that was a lot of Glacier Bay. There's some experiences you're not ready for until you're there. So the other thing we learnt is like Mother Nature is the boss. Yeah, you don't get to choose, she does. When we left Juneau, we had one day of sunshine, and then we got taught some good lessons. The weather came in, a very intense low pressure system came over Haida Gwaii and was blowing up to 50 knot winds on the outside passage and 30 to 40 knot winds where we were. You don't go anywhere in a kayak. There was a small craft advisory warning, which means that they're saying, hey, little boats, you shouldn't go out there. Little boats means like little fishing boats, not tiny kayaks without motors. So we had our decision-making tested quite early on the trip, and that was, I think, a really good thing. We it's hard sometimes to look at a bit of water and be like, oh, should we push through that, or is that a bad idea? And in the end, we were delayed by a week during that time because we had 3 days where we couldn't leave camp, and we stayed in our tents. And the scariest thing was listening to the trees above us creaking and groaning in the wind above our tents, and just hoping that that wasn't the way we were going to die, because it's just not kayaky at all. But we did make some really good decisions, and yeah, it was a hard time. There was days where we couldn't make it as far as we'd intended to, and sometimes it's hard to be okay with that and feel like you're still succeeding. And so there was a lot of lessons in not going when it's bad conditions, and thankfully we were never on the water in dangerous conditions, because we did the trip for fun. So we'd walk down to the beach and go, huh, that doesn't look fun. Should we stay at camp? Let's stay at camp. We did have one night where we got into camp quite late, it was a swamp. We camped in it anyway. There wasn't any other option. It was just muskeg everywhere. Alaska is just wet. And so then we set up our tent, which was wet, and we got in our tent, and our sleeping bags were mildly damp. Our thermals were a little bit damp, and we learnt a really interesting lesson. Tiger balm in the cold is a bad idea. So we had really sore muscles, so we're like, great, we'll just like rub tiger balm all over our backs, and then we from the tropics, all that happens is this like awesome fiery feeling. All that happens in the cold is shivery hypothermia. So we're sitting in our sleeping bags like, it's so cold, because we'd covered ourselves in tiger balm. We didn't have a good sleep that night, and the next morning when we'd managed to pack up all of camp, we got to the beach, and when it came down to it, we didn't leave, and we set camp up again and dried everything out, because we got to the point where we decided that would have been an unsafe decision. So we managed to overcome some of those. We passed our first milestone, crossing Stevens Passage, and yeah, I still remember my heart beating a little faster as we'd paddled out into that passage. We'd already seen 2 huge cruise ships go through that day, and yeah, I don't...
How many kilometres was it?
It was 35 across. The first little point of islands we could stop on for like a rock to pee. I tried to hide behind the wind, but I was not like in the right headspace enough to figure out which side the wind was like sheltered from. So I was just trying to stand behind this rock, and Matilda's like, what are you doing? You're not on the sheltered side. And she dragged me around and fed me. Then we got to the second group of islands, and we were like, we will camp here. It's going to be great. It was literally a pile of rocks with logs that had grown moss, and then things had started growing out of it. And rubbish. There was no way we could camp there, so we had some lunch and kept going. It was 3 p.m. at that stage. But it was lucky we kept crossing, because when we finally did get across, that was when that low pressure system really hit us. So we would have been stuck out in the middle of Stevens Passage. So we learned some lessons about perseverance, but it was definitely Mother Nature who forced us to keep paddling that day.
Would you like to get your poem?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty funny when it's raining so much and it's so cold and miserable sometimes, that the thing that keeps you going is that you wake up in the morning and you know that at lunch you get to eat pesto pasta, and you spend like 5 hours just dreaming of the pesto pasta, and we did that on a number of occasions. But Lucy actually wrote a poem about Alaska, which she'd like to share with everyone.
It's hard to explain what it's like in Alaska, so this is something I wrote one day when I was stuck at camp. Rain. Rain is not something that happens in Alaska. Rain is Alaska. It is the green that soaks the mountains, the moss that drops from branches and crawls across the ground. Rain fills the pools and gaps between the rocks, giving life to skunk cabbage, then drowning fallen trees. Eroding ways, stone, curving carved landscapes, tearing down slopes, rain takes it all in its path. But Alaska is rain that's mostly light and gentle, a friend that's always with you, annoying and at times corrosive, but brings all the beauty and colour to your world. So hopefully that gives you a little picture of what it's like to be wet all the time. Yeah, and I think during that time, eroding ways, you grow a very deep respect for nature, and I think it's very unusual for humans to feel vulnerable, and not that we are invincible. And it's one of the amazing things about kayaking is that you're not in control. You have to respect the ocean and Mother Nature, for sure.
I'd also like to point out 2 of these pictures, which are of the intertidal zone. We've actually written a song about the intertidal zone. We don't have enough time to perform it tonight. But that was
a music video.
that was a massive lesson for us. So you could rock up to camp late in the afternoon or at night, and it would be high tide, so the water's all the way up to the beach, and wake up in the morning. And this example here, the water was about 200 meters away from the top of the beach, which doesn't seem like very far, but when you have to carry all of your bags twice, and then come back, carry one kayak, and go back and carry the other kayak, and there's barnacles and all types of anemones and starfish I remember at the start of the trip, Lucy and I tried to avoid stepping on like any barnacles at all. And then after 2 weeks, we were like, we can't do this anymore. This is impossible. But yeah, so we learned to definitely have a look at the charts and make sure that the intertidal zones were as small as they possibly could be. Another thing that we didn't realize we'd enjoy so much is going into the towns as we traveled down the coast. So before the trip, Lucy and I were like, we're gonna, we'll pick up our resupply boxes and then we'll keep on going and we'll camp just outside the town because we don't want to deal with people and society. And it wasn't long before we realized how much the Southeast Alaskans and people living on the coast of BC, they just totally took our hearts. It was just amazing. Everybody was so friendly and so over the top willing to help. John, in this bottom left corner, insisted for about half an hour that we could put our kayaks on the back of his truck to drive across the island from Gustavus to Bartlett Cove to start our journey, to try and save us taxi fares. Our kayaks hung about so they're about 5.2 meters long, and they were probably 2.5 to 3 meters hanging off the end of his truck. So he was like, I've got rope, I've got all of these, we'll tie them on, we'll make it really cool, I'll drive really slow. And eventually we gave in and it was totally fine, but it was a bit nerve-wracking as our first day. But we across the island, instead of sending our resupply boxes, which we had 6 resupply boxes with our food, instead of sending them to post offices along the way, we sent them to actual legitimate people. And we did that by just posting on our social media and asking if anyone in these towns would be willing to help. And people just loved it. They said they could receive our box, and most of them said we could also stay at their house. So we got to get a bit of taste of the local feel and the communities down the coast, which was just incredible. And we've made so many friends along the way. It's just been amazing. Did you have anything to add to that? Yeah, so thank you, everybody. Probably no one's in this room, but you might be watching on YouTube. Yeah, welcome to Canada.
So no trip doesn't come without a stupid decision, or maybe something that should have been better researched or more well thought through. The day we crossed the border into Canada, we were pumped to cross the border. It's an exciting moment, getting to another country in a kayak. So it was late in the evening when we crossed the border, which was an exciting moment.
An imaginary line in the middle of the ocean.
You can see Matilda here. She got her passport out. There wasn't anyone around though. But at this point it was about 9 p.m. So it was getting on dark, and we generally had a rule that we'd find camp by 9. So we were like, okay, we need to find camp. We've crossed the border, Canada, we're ready. There wasn't many places. It was a pretty stark area, and we finally found a little creek mouth that had a flattish area, and behind it quite a steep incline, and then some mossy, unfriendly parts as well. So there was a bit of grass in the intertidal zone and then a clearish patch behind it. Admittedly, there was some dry seaweed there. But we thought, it's fine, there's grass, it only comes up here on the big tides, so we'll camp here. And we set up camp, and then we were eating dinner, and I was like, I'll just check the tides to see if they're higher than normal. Oh, yep, they're higher than normal. Nah, she'll be right. So we decided it'll be fine. And then we were going to bed, and we thought, what if we come up with a plan just in case? And so we set our alarm for 1 a.m. High tide was at 2. We thought we'd check where it is. And then as we're going to sleep, it was like, what if we just in case think about who's going to do what if the tide does. Now, any sensible person at this point would be like, everything's telling you the tide's probably going to come to where your tent is. If you're making this many plans, just camp somewhere else. But we were tired, and it was, late, and we just weren't making the best decisions. So the plan was, if the tide came up, I would get the tarp and the food, and Matilde would get the tent and our gear, and we'd head for higher ground, which was up the cliff. At 12 p.m, I woke up and I was like, ooh, my feet feel funny. And I was like, oh my God, they're floating. And the water had come under our tent but hadn't seeped through. So it was like our tent was this waterbed with the tide coming in. And I was like, Maddie, go to the plan. And so we're running around getting all our stuff. Luckily, we had amazing dry bags. So we just shoved our sleeping bags straight in. They hadn't got wet, and put all our gear in and started the plan. And I won't go through the whole thing. We've got a video on our Facebook that explains the whole thing.
But
the funniest part was, and it sounds quite stupid when you say it out loud, but Manny's yelled across to me at one point, "Lucia, the kayak's still tied up." And I was like, "Oh yeah. Yeah, they're still tied up, but you know, the tree we tied them to is floating away." So off our kayaks are going with their piece of driftwood, effectively. But you guys know what driftwood here can mean. It's like an entire log, but it was floating away. So we learned that no matter how big driftwood is, it's still driftwood, and you shouldn't tie your kayaks to it because it will escape. It was also the heaviest rain we experienced during our whole trip. So we were really wet. And that night, you can see where our tarp is. That's what we slept under after our tent was washed away. It was small enough that we had to sleep in the fetal position, and the moss was hollow. So every time, it was like we were on logs that had a hollow bit underneath it, and the moss had just grown over. Every time Matilde got up, I could hear it echoing underneath us. And I was like, "Stop getting up, don't get up, just sit really still and hope for the best." But we made it through that. We also, we were in Canada illegally for 5 days. Crossing the border, it's like a 3 to 4 day paddle before you get to any place where there's people. You're not supposed to make land in that 100 kilometres because, but that's obviously impossible in a kayak. So we get to Prince Rupert after 4 p.m. on a Friday and went to the information centre. "Hey, we're here from Canada. How do we tell the people?" From Alaska. "We're in Canada. How do we tell the policemen that we're here and, do the right thing?" And they were like, "This is Prince Rupert, which is the border town of Canada." And they're like, "That's funny, we've never been asked that question before." So they Googled it and they're like, "It's closed till Monday, so you'll just have to wait the weekend." So we did. We went to the office on Monday. No office, not a thing. The address is just a building. So we went to City Hall and found out that there's a reporting number you can call. What the normal process is, calling a policeman in Ottawa and telling him, "Yep, I don't have any drugs. Yeah, I don't have any animal stuff. I'm fine." Okay, and they go, "Yep, no worries." Very vigorous process. We told them the truth. We're very honest people, that we'd been there for as long as we've been there. And we were told that we should not leave, do not move from your location. We got picked up by the federal police, taken down to our kayaks, interviewed for about an hour. They were very kind, I will say that. They were very courteous and not aggressive and understanding. Our dock that we landed on was the only dock in the whole area that didn't have the reporting number to call on a sign at the dock. So
That was good.
That was good for us because they were like, "There's a sign at the dock," and we're like, "We swear there isn't." So we were told that we should have been charged $1,000 per vessel. That's what a kayak is, but they were going to let us off this time. Now, according to American records, we're still in the USA. We're not really we both have like one number for ourselves. I'm leaving the country in 2 days, so I'm going to the airport 5 hours early, just in case. So yeah, that was a bit of a debacle, and they were our two biggest challenges. Staying in Prince Rupert delayed us by about 3 days because of all of the waiting and confusion. And we learnt not to camp in the intertidal zones during a spring tide. So they were our two biggest mistakes on our trip. But we managed to come out of them happy and smiley and with a good story. So that's the main thing.
And I can't help but think that when we went through moments like this, thinking about the people who have kayaked through the Inside Passage alone, like by themselves. For example, Susan Conrad, who did it, and I can't remember what year it was, by herself. So every day when Lucy and I are helping each other carry our kayaks up the rocks, she's had to kayak all day and do all of that herself, and she was flooded in her tent twice as well. And Lucy and I kind of put on this weird, funny Irish coping voice when things get a little bit tough. And so we were just, it was bad, but we were just pissing ourselves laughing for hours after this happened. So to have that kind of attitude was really important. After we got flooded, BC then decided to just spend the next month totally apologising to us, and the sun came out.
In a very Canadian way.
In a very Canadian way. She said sorry, and it was just amazing. We had, with the sun, we had north westerly winds mostly, so we could sail, which is a lot of fun. And it meant that when we passed our next few milestones, which was Cape Caution and the rapids, we were passing them like perfectly flat days. When we passed Cape Caution, we could have stood up in our kayaks. It was that calm. I could have touched the rock, but Lucy was like, no, we've got to keep going. Something's going to happen.
This is like the Coast Guard was saying, like, there's once every 2 years that it's calm at Cape Caution. So I was still in this like, anxiety mode, like at any moment a huge thunderstorm's going to try and kill us. I know it. So I was like very highly stressed, even though it was a perfectly calm day.
After Cape Caution, we decided that it was going to be really tight to get to this workshop on time that we'd planned with these 15-year-old girls in Tribune Bay. So we did the calculations, and we figured that from Port Hardy, if we paddled really hard, if we paddled 293 kilometres in 8 days, we could make it to the workshop on time. So Lucy, loving challenge a little bit more than I do. She's the one that came up with the idea, and I felt bad and decided to go along with it. No, not really. I was excited to also have a bit of a challenge, and we were super lucky to have the calm weather with us and the ability to sail. There were some days where we were against a really strong tide, and we wouldn't have been able to make the distances that we did without our sails because we wouldn't have paddled fast enough. And it was just incredible. We saw so many whales along the way. The photo on the bottom left is of the rapids just north of the Yakulta Rapids, where it absolutely rips through there, and the ocean turns into a horizontal waterfall, and I'm not exaggerating. It's absolutely insane. You have to cross through the rapids when it's in the slack, when the water's calm. So that gives you about a 30 to 40 minute window, and sometimes you're crossing a distance of six kilometres. So we paddle about 5 kilometres an hour, so it was really tight to get through those rapids sometimes. But also very exciting and a lot of fun. And we did make it to the workshop on time. When we got to the workshop, they told us that if we weren't going to make it, they were going to send out a seaplane to pick us up. And we were like, why didn't you tell us this 8 days ago? No, but it was really amazing. All the girls were on the beach clapping and cheering us in, and we got to spend a whole couple of days with them. So it was really, really cool. So thank you, Canada, for the sun.
As you can imagine, like one of the things that everyone asks you about and you think about before a trip like this is like, are we going to fight? Are we going to be friends at the end? You know, like what's that going to be like? And I think we're very happy that we didn't fight and our friendship got a lot stronger through it. But, you know, it's not something we didn't talk about either, and we both know that there were days where we were very frustrated with each other. I'll talk about my day and Maddie can talk about hers, but I think the thing that really made it work is that when we were in these moments, we didn't take it out on the other person. We didn't voice those frustrations because it doesn't get you anywhere. And one thing that I really realized about a month in was like, we would automatically say thank you for everything. And it's silly because we do the same things every day. Every day someone would set up the tent. Every day someone would heat up the food. Every day someone would treat the water. But if someone thanks you for that every time, it feels like that's appreciated. And so it really helped, I think, for us having that, like, because, you know, some days you're like, I don't want to set up the tent. I just want to sleep in my kayak because I'm too tired to get, like, there was days when I got to shore and I was just like, I just got to sit in my kayak for the next hour and maybe it'll set itself up, you know. And so when someone thanks you for those efforts, even though, you know, you're doing it for yourself just as much as the other person, it's an important element, and I think something that really helped us on the way. My hardest days, I got a bit sick. I don't usually eat meat, and I accepted a gifted meal that we had, and then the next day suffered the consequences. I hadn't eaten processed meat in probably about 5 years. And yeah, what I didn't do well, I insisted on paddling, but only made it 6K that day. I've never felt my paddle was so heavy in my life.
It was the only day I paddled ahead of Lucy slightly.
Yeah, and that was hard. But the harder day actually came 2 days later when I was still a bit sick. This is where I'd camped the night before. We got to this camp. I didn't yet have my hammock because I'd had a debacle at the start, and it was meeting me in Prince Rupert. So we got to this, we tried a couple of camps and there was literally nothing. And what I did at this camp, Maddie slept in a hammock, but I built with Maddie's help, a platform of driftwood and then put the tent up on it. But this was what the beach looked like. We were just surrounded by debris and rubbish, and it was behind us in the forest was just a swamp. It was a river mouth as wide as this room and just muskeg and everything. So I didn't sleep well that night, and the next morning we had a 10-kilometre crossing. And crossings are hard because for us, because Maddie goes a bit slower and I generally go a bit faster, so we have to always meet in the middle. But that day I was like hungry, I was sleep deprived, I was still a little bit sick, and I just remember paddling next to Mathilde, and I was just like, why don't you paddle faster?
Internally.
This is what was happening inside me.
I could feel her laser eyes.
And I was just like, and then I'd have these moments like, it's not about you, it's not about Mathilde, it's about you. You need to get your head in the right space. But yeah, that day, the hardest thing for me was to keep my mouth shut and silently paddle, but I really struggled. And then we got to the other side and Mathilde made lunch, and then I was fine. But I really struggled on that day, and the crossing, the tide was taking us a little bit off course sometimes, and so we had to keep readjusting, and it was just one of those days where there was nothing particularly terrible about the conditions or the day. It was just that moment where everything brought me down, and that's when you sort of project the hardship that you're experiencing onto the other person. And even though you know it's not about them, it's what your mind does. So you have to keep it inside. So that was my hardest moment on the trip.
I think it's pretty good that we both had one hard moment in 3 months, can I just say. My hardest moment was also not because of the weather or anything specifically. It was cumulative over a couple of days. So we'd had a bit of a tough crossing the day before where we tried to eat lunch, but the tide was coming in so fast that we just had to basically inhale our food and get back in our kayaks, so we didn't have the time to relax a little bit and have a break in the middle of the day. So it was a long day. As we were kayaking into our camp for that night, we almost got hit by a tugboat, which was like half the height of this room, and heading straight towards us. It's a long story, but essentially they passed about 20 to 30 meters behind us in the end. They didn't slow down, and it was on autopilot. And the reason how we got out of the way was because Lucy and I paddled hard. We didn't see a side of the boat, so it wasn't turning at all. It was heading straight towards us. We tried to radio them, and it didn't work, so we just paddled hard. It was on autopilot, and there were 3 people at the back smoking and waving at us very kindly. We could have chose a few different hand gestures in return, but we decided to just keep on paddling. So I was a little bit shaken from that. That's probably the only time on the trip where I actually thought this could be the end. And then we arrived at this beautiful camp, which was just logs, and we had to walk across the rainy logs. Behind the logs was a swamp. Surprise! So we camped in the very wet swamp, and for some reason mosquitoes and midges don't like Lucy, they like Mathilde. So I was getting absolutely smashed. So all of those things happened, and then the next day the weather was fine, it was nice, but I was just on struggle street for the whole day. My mental game wasn't strong, and I remember Lucy just being like so happy and singing, and internally I was just like, shut up. Like, how are you still singing? I can't believe it. Like, just stop it. You're torturing me. This is horrible. But I didn't say any of that. I just kept very quiet. I think at one point I might have said, I'm not in the mood to talk. And then we just kept on kayaking. So, yeah, it was definitely one of those times where I had to try really hard to keep it inside. And I'm really glad that we both have that personality. This would have been a very long trip if it wasn't for that. Thanks. Oh, yeah, my part again. So, marine debris. Did we see any rubbish on the inside passage? Yes, lots of it. So when we started the kayaking trip, we actually thought that because the inside passage is quite well protected, a lot of the debris gets washed up on the west coast of all of the islands, but we thought inside the passage it won't accumulate as much rubbish. There was trash on every single beach that we landed on for the whole 3 months, except for our first 5 days in Glacier Bay. And that could have just been because of the water currents, but also we also know that up in Glacier Bay is a very protected park. The rangers go in and clean up the park as well if there's any trash left behind. There's a very strong leave no trace camping policy up there, and even the cruise ships that go up there, they're not allowed to serve food on plastic plates or use plastic cutlery and things like that. There's also no fishing. All the way down the inside passage, we found a lot of fishing equipment. So ghost nets, just lines in general, ropes, buoys, foam pieces that were the size of trees. We thought were trees because there were moss growing on them, but they were actually foam. We also found a lot of plastic bottles. Some of them were the same brand that we find on our shores in Australia, because all of our oceans are connected. So that was really interesting. We logged the marine debris at our camps, so we would section out 100 meters of the beach and do a beach cleanup, and then we would categorize all of the rubbish that we found and take photos. So now we've collected that data. We did not carry the rubbish out. Lots of people think that we carry tons and tons of trash out on our kayaks. It would be impossible. We also didn't drag a float behind us with the rubbish, but we did pull it up above the high tide line. And what we'd like to do with that data is give it to the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup and the other organizations in Alaska that are working towards stopping marine debris at the source, and we can give them a pretty good picture of what is found in amongst those islands. We also participated in a beach cleanup with the Living Oceans Society in Raft Cove on the west coast of Vancouver Island. They're one of the organizations we've fundraised over $10,000 for. And we picked up these 5 heli bags full of rubbish. That was 5 volunteers. We picked that up on about 1 kilometre of the beach. So yeah, it was pretty insane. And then as we kayaked down the coast towards higher populations, we would find things like takeaway coffee cups, plastic spoons and cutlery and plates and water bottles and everyday food packaging and things like that as we came closer to people. But yes, definitely not pristine out there, but interesting to see nonetheless. The wildlife that we saw on this trip, we've talked a lot about being wet and cold all the time, but there was obviously some incredible moments. For the first 2 months of our trip, we saw a whale every single day. And I had never seen a humpback whale in the wild before this trip. And in our first few days in Glacier Bay, we saw 3 of them completely launching themselves out of the water while we drank our afternoon tea. Grizzly bear was in the first week as well. Like we said before, we saw 12 of them, 12 grizzly bears. That one was looking all cute and cuddly and rolling around on its back and like grabbing its feet and being like, oh, come and cuddle me. And then all of a sudden it just rolls over and picks up this giant log and just goes, and bites this giant chunk out of this huge log. And Lucy and I were like, not cute and cuddly, okay, let's stay away from that.
We camped about 3 kilometres away.
Yeah. Before our trip, we were reading lots of blogs about people who'd seen bald eagles on the trip. We're like, I wonder if we're going to see any bald eagles. Some trees had literally about 400 bald eagles on the tree. It was like this giant Christmas tree, and the bald eagles were the baubles. We saw so many of them, and they remained to be as majestic as the first one. Harbour seals chilling out on the rocks, and we also had many stellar sea lions come up behind your boat, so you'll be like super silent and quiet, and you're just kayaking and gliding along, and all of a sudden you hear and this giant sea lion, which is like taller than I am, is just about 10 centimeters away from the back of your boat, and you're just hoping they don't decide to jump up on the deck for fun or something. But they were super curious and lots of fun, and we saw thousands and thousands of birds as well. So that's, I think, one of the things Lucy and I love so much about kayaking, and other kayakers in this room will probably agree, the ability to get up and close to nature, because you're not making heaps of noise, so they're not scared of you. Sometimes they scare you. It's just such an incredible feeling, and one thing which was interesting and sad was that we actually only saw 3 orcas in the whole 3 months of our journey. And those 3 orcas were one group, and they were in Alaska. We didn't see any of them in BC. And I'm sure many of you have heard about the story of the mother who's lost her young one a few weeks ago, and she's been pushing it around ever since. She stopped today or yesterday. But that was one of the things I thought we would be seeing orcas, bountiful orcas, as we travel down the BC coast, and so I think that tells us a lot about the health and their population size and things like that. Yes, sad but happy at the same time.
So we finished last week, and I'm sure you guys are accumulating a lot of questions. We're almost at the end, but a lot of people are like, what do you do after kayaking for 3 months? Like, are you okay? Are you less sane or more sane?
We just rap Eminem.
But we finished. We've already run a beach cleanup since we've finished. We're here doing this talk. I'm going back to Australia in 2 days because whilst I was away, I got offered an awesome job back home. But this isn't the end of adventure for us. This isn't the end of doing marine debris work. There's a lot that we can do on an everyday basis, but we're excited to still be running workshops, doing talks, helping people find the road to making good, like the choice to be more plastic free. It's not that people don't want to. Often it's like you just sit there and you go, oh my God, how do I do this? So doing those community events and workshops is really fun for us because someone did that for us, and we want to pass that forward. So yeah, snap back to reality. We're back in the real world now. It takes a little bit to adjust to city noises and people around. We did have the first couple of days back, we were traveling with a group of 8 people because a bunch of our friends and family came and met us at the end, which was lovely. Thanks, guys. And but yeah, I remember that first day I was in a group of 8 people and I was just like, too many people. I don't know what to do. Do I have to talk to everyone at once? This is scary. After spending 3 months talking to myself or Mathilde, only myself when she wouldn't talk to me. So yeah, it's definitely been an adjustment, but I think we both agreed that we were happy and sad to finish. If someone had said to us, no, you have to keep paddling for another month, we would have been like, great, and kept going. But also not dehydrated food, having a bathroom, sleeping in a bed, all very fun things for us. We also want to take a moment, our trip would not have been the same without the support we had from the paddling community and the gear that we were sponsored along the way. So that's a picture of everything that fits in our kayaks, which is pretty massive. Our sponsors, there's quite a lot of them, and I'm actually just going to take a moment to talk to them because I think the other day I calculated we got sponsored almost 30 grand of gear, which is amazing. So we had Aquapack sponsored us our dry bags, which, kept us dry when the tide came under our tent. But we had everything in dry bags, and we never had anything get wet. And in fact, when they got sandy, we would just go and dunk them in the ocean to get the sand off before we put them in our kayaks. That's how much we trusted them. Kokatat sponsored us our PFDs, our dry tops, and our clothes, that some of the thermals that I remember Mum, I was on a call to Mum, she was like, so do you just wear the same clothes every day? And I was like, yep. And then there's this pause where there was supposed to be more information, and then I was like, nah, we just, same thermals day and night. Yep. So they got a bit stanky, but they were so warm. Even when they were wet, they were warm. So that was amazing. Our sails, like Mathilde said, they were so much fun, and they were an amazing part of our trip. Loopy Cafe, who sponsored us, cooked and dehydrated all of our food for the entire trip, which was over 500 meals. And it was waste-free, and all of the food they gave us would have gone to landfill. It was rescued as well. So all rescued food, all vegan, and all dehydrated without plastic. So a pretty amazing trip. Werner Paddles sponsored us our paddles, which I don't know if anyone's paddled with a heavy paddle for a long time before, but it is seriously upsetting. So we were very happy to have carbon fibre paddles. Marine Press sponsored us $2,000 worth of charts. We didn't want to rely on technology with the amount of sun we had in Alaska, which was 0, really. We had 12 days where we didn't wear our dry tops of a month and a half in Alaska. So having physical charts meant a lot to us, and it also helps you really learn how to navigate. But also Navionics gave us digital charts, which helped us with tides, which was absolutely essential when we were crossing the Dent and Yakulta Rapids. I had never paddled in a place where the current change and the tide change don't match, which was just so confusing. So yeah, Navionics gives you both current timing and tide timing information, which was really essential. She Flies sponsored us a drone, which is She Flies teaches specifically women how to fly drones, and so we have some incredible footage of some of the places we were in. Boreal Design sponsored us our kayaks, which were amazing and obviously an essential part of our trip. Cardzilla made us these pretty shirts so we look like we know what we're doing, and also some hats and other things. And Lunette is a menstrual cup, which for you ladies out there, if you've never used menstrual cups, they change your life in the outdoors. Not having to carry used tampons and pads around with you for a month, yeah, that's the thing. And also just like having the ease of dealing with, it makes periods a lot easier. And for all you guys who don't have your periods, that's all I have to say. So thanks to all of our sponsors, you made this trip incredible and possible and so much easier than it would have been. We both had just finished being students and took part-time jobs to be able to plan this trip, so money isn't something we have a lot of. And yeah, that's all we wanted to talk about. Oh my God, we're on time.
Know, right?
That happened a lot on our trip. So basically we have half an hour now for you guys to ask questions. And if you don't want to stick around, that's fine. But if you want to stick around and ask questions, please do so, because we find it's hard to summarize like 3 months in an hour. So I'm sure that there's some questions we can answer. Yeah. Oh, there's a roving mic.
First of all, you two are incredible. We're just pretty excited to be here. And next, by the way, if you don't want to take all your stuff to Australia,
Nice.
are you leaving anything?
You can have my pogies.
All right. We're doing a lot of dehydrating, and we're wondering, we saw that you did it, you wrapped everything, or Lupi Cafe, in newspaper. So what kind of newspaper would not make a mess all over your stuff?
So that was actually really interesting. When we trialled it back home, basically we chose newspaper because we wanted to make it something that anyone can do, that there wasn't a price barrier or an accessibility barrier. When we did it in Australia, we actually, we just went to the newsagent and said, hey, can we have your unsold papers? They tried to give me 100 and I told them I didn't need that many. And then we just wrapped each meal in 3 layers of newspaper. When we did it here, we did wrap all the meals. Mathilde did the majority of them because I came a bit later. We had some like thrown away baking paper and like wrapping, like brown wrapping paper that we did the base layer on. That not all of them had that. The ones that didn't have that, there was sometimes like you could taste a little newspapery taste, but we're both alive. And that was as bad as it got. Definitely, I think having, like if you use a bit of baking paper for the first layer, but like even when some of them got a little bit damp in the flood scenario, but they were fine. One choice we did make, rather than having like all of our breakfasts in one bag, all of our lunches in one bag, we had like a dry bag with 3 days worth of food, so that we weren't going to destroy all of our breakfasts if one dry bag got wet. But yeah, even in storage, for like our last resupply was in storage for 4 months when we got to it, and it was totally fine. So yeah.
And we also, before we left, we went to Mech and asked if they had any leftover silica gel packs, like the ones they put in the shoe boxes. And they were like, come out the back. No, they didn't say that creepy. But they had this massive bag out the back full of them, and they said, take as many as you want. So we had them, in a handful of them inside the dry bags. In case moisture got into the bags, there was that backup as well. But yeah, I'm glad it worked. Yeah, and that it worked in like the wettest, like humid kayaking ocean environment as well is a pretty good indication. So we'll definitely be using it every time we go hiking and things like that. Yeah.
Did you have a backup plan if it failed?
Did we have a backup plan? Our backup plan, actually, so we had Loopy Cafe.
Yeah,
Lisa she became like our Canadian mum. I'm pretty sure like the week we started paddling, she started cooking more meals because she was like so worried something was going to go wrong that she could send us some to a point. But, you know, we've been living single-use plastic-free for 2.5 years now. So we're very good at going into a very regular shopping centre and finding what's not in plastic. So what we would have done, we wouldn't have succeeded in being plastic-free, essentially, single-use plastic-free. We probably would have had to compromise. And we did actually once get some extra rice because we had been delayed by so many days. We were worried that in the next leg the same thing would happen. So we wanted to have some emergency rice, and we couldn't find any that wasn't in plastic, and we liked living, so we got some in plastic. So I think that's something that we're really passionate about also is like, we screw it up. We get plastic too. Everyone makes mistakes. It's very hard to do it perfectly, and you will make a mistake. And I think it's really important that if you're trying to be single-use plastic-free, you're kind to yourself and you share your failures so other people can do. But yeah, basically, we just would have made it best with what was available in the towns.
And we wouldn't have been able to carry like 2 weeks of food at a time. We would have had to get because there was always a town within like a week period of each other. So we would have not been able to carry, basically the amount of dry food that we had. But yes.
Got a question down here.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. Sorry. So actually, I'm going to just make sure that Ava can see me in the light. I just wanted to share a little personal story about you and about the light. I know in July, when I was up north, I would look at the stars and look at the moon and try to figure out what time it was. Because you know that you guys, when you went up, you probably had 21, 22 hours of daylight, even though it was cloudy. But for our Aboriginals, we are able to tell what the time is. And I know, my uncle, kept teaching me and teaching me and teaching me. And oftentimes I'd say, well, what time it is? And he said, well, look at the sun, then look at the moon. And in between the sun and the moon, you can tell what time it is. And I didn't know that. So I wondered, like, for the two of you, like, how did you figure out time? And were you able to do that? Like, you used to watch.
Back home, I think I can judge the time of the day a lot easier because it fluctuates by about half an hour between the whole year.
Seasons.
Yeah, between our seasons. So we don't have these really long summers and really short day winters. I'm still not used to it. I still think that it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon when it's 8 p.m. and I still haven't eaten dinner by 10 o'clock because I'm like, no, it's not dinner time yet. So no, we used our watches.
We tried to watch, Mathilde succeeded, I failed. I tried to watch the sunset once. It's so slow. I was like and I went to bed because it just takes so long for the sun to set and you're so tired. So I think I saw sunset once.
I waited because I thought we'd be seeing the sunset over the ocean quite often, but in reality there's islands in the way and they're mountains, which sounds obvious, but I didn't think of that. So on this one opportunity where we had a clear view of the Pacific Ocean, I waited till 10:45 for the sun to descend underneath the horizon. So yeah, that was exciting. There were definitely times where we tried to ignore our watches, like when the alarms went off at 3:30 in the morning because we needed to catch a certain tide. Yeah, but no.
What was your longest trip experience, kayaking or otherwise,
before I had asked Mathilde to do this trip with me, she hadn't done more than a day, like she hadn't done an overnight trip before.
Yeah.
Any overnight trip? Wow.
So we often wonder who's more. So I've been a kayak guide since I was 18. We often try to figure out who's more crazy. Is it Mathilde, who had no idea what was going on and went anyway, or me, who knew what was going on and went anyway? But yeah, I think like Mathilde and I had done a number of adventures together. We had studied full-time, worked, ran a club, and campaigned in our community all at the same time, which is very intense. And we figured if we could get through, and we were living together, so if we could get through that, we probably could get through this, and we proved ourselves right. So
Yeah, and I think we also have, amazing families and friends that we've surrounded ourselves with that don't doubt us when we come up with these kinds of ideas. When I first told my parents that I was going to do this trip, Mum was like worried, and Dad was like, oh yeah, sure. It's a bit insane, but neither of them were like, no, you're never going to be able to do that. And our friends, often asked why we wanted to do it, but they still believed in us, and I think that's really important as well, to surround yourselves with those kinds of people. But we did do one week-long trip on Fraser Island back home to trial the food and to try and do some longer days, because I hadn't really kayaked like longer than 20 kilometers in a day. And we had one day where we did 47 kilometers.
which we repeated on the trip.
Yeah, a number of times. So a week is the short answer to that question.
And I think that's something that is actually really important to highlight, because a lot of people look at this trip and they're like, oh my God, I'd never be able to do that, or like, that's crazy, but really having a dream and then being like, okay, what do I have to plan and train to do this is what it's about. And so like when we did the workshop with the girls on Hornby Island, we had like, what do you think we needed more of for this trip, skill or commitment? And it's commitment. It's not, you could get the world's best kayaker, but they're not necessarily going to be able to kayak with one person for 3 months, because if they're not committed to that idea, right? And it's like, if they never really wanted to do it, then it's much easier to give up. And I think that especially for women, we're really passionate about sharing that adventure is a space for everyone, and that like you should just get out there and give it a go, because what are you going to lose? Come back with a good story if you fail. Yeah.
I have one question.
Yeah.
How did you get your kayaks back when they were floating off down there?
Well, luckily
On the
they were
log.
only like, how do we get our kayaks back when they were floating away in the flood? Luckily they were only a couple of meters offshore, so I just waded out into the tide and got them. We were already totally soaked. There was one morning, Mathilde had done a cleanup, and we found like military explosives on the beach. And they said, call the police. And we had phone reception at that time. So Mathilde was taking a photo of the things, and I was calling the police. My kayak's name is Sven. Sven thought this was a great time to be like, it's time to go. And so like I'm halfway through this phone call with the police, and I look up and my kayak is just like floating off into the bay. And it's just like, it's like having kids. You're just like, get back here. So Mathilde had to go and get them. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm ready for kids. 3 months with a kayak was pretty hard. I was like, can't you get yourself over the intertidal zone?
Did you have a spot, did you have a spot rescue system or some other system like that?
Good question. Yes, don't go out into the wilderness without one. Lucy had a PLB, personal locator beacon, and then I was carrying the Garmin InReach, which also acts as a PLB in the case of an emergency.
Which is a personal locator
That's
beacon.
what I just said.
Oh, did you? Oh, okay.
I probably said it fast. So it's got an SOS function, and then you can also get a subscription and like a phone plan. You can send text messages. So we didn't think we'd use that function too much, but we actually did end up using it quite a bit in the end, because we had marine radios as well. So we were getting marine forecasts on our radios and forecasts on our Garmin InReach, and sometimes they weren't quite the same, or it was telling us that it was nice and calm and go for it, but our eyeballs were telling us, heck no, I'm not going anywhere. So we would message Ethan, one of our friends on the support team, what's the bigger picture here in terms of storms that are coming through, and he could just send us back a forecast to our exact location for the next few days. So yeah, we had those devices with us and charged them using our solar.
And also the amazing thing about that is one of the schools we went and did a talk for before our trip, we got to the school and it was just a passionate parent who had organised us for us to be there at her son's school. But she'd also managed to get the PNC to raise $750, which was the money that paid for our Garmin InReach. Otherwise, we would have had a spot tracker. So we didn't know they were doing that. And so we rocked up to this school to do this talk, and they handed us that money. And it was very, very humbling experience to have. So we were able to tell the kids that they were responsible for us being a lot safer, which was nice. But yeah, that was a pretty humbling moment. Oh yeah, just for the people on YouTube, I think, as well.
During your beach cleanup, was there a specific type of garbage that you found the most of? And as a takeaway message for the audience, is there any specific type of garbage or plastic that we should avoid to make the biggest difference? Or is it just a series of incremental little things that matters?
I mean, I think the hard thing is that, like, plastic and styrofoam was what we found the most of, but plastic is always what we find the most of. Hard plastic remnant, a remnant is less than 50% of what it originally was. They break down in the environment and become microplastics or like larger bits of plastic. But I think the hard thing is like, it's really important to take your own measures in your life, and I think getting rid of single-use plastic, which is not essential in our lives, is a really important step. Especially bottles. We always find plastic bottles on these beaches. But you could get rid of single-use plastic in your life, but if you lived on an island and never told anyone about it, it wouldn't make a difference. The important part is having conversations, telling people, letting your local or what do you guys call it? Municipality know about that. Joining in the conversation, because what is happening at the moment, this plastic is being produced because of a consumer demand, and it's that consumer demand we need to change. And so if you only change like 2 bits of things, if you like got rid of plastic bags, water bottles and single-use coffee cups in your life, and that's all you changed, but then you told everyone about it all the time, that would be more important than going completely single-use plastic free. So I think that's like something that's really important to know, is that it's about trying to demand something different from the producers, and they're responding to what our society is asking for. And then if anyone is really struggling with how, and they can't figure it out, and they don't have someone to talk to, get them to call their grandma, because she probably didn't have plastic when she was growing up, right? Because it was invented not that long ago. But yeah, I don't know if you want to add to that.
No, but yeah, it's always, plastics are always what we find the most of. And what was interesting was that because of the logs on the beaches here, you don't often find all the tiny little pieces of soft plastic and things like that we do on our beaches back home, because it's hidden under like 1 to 2 meters of logs. So we could also not be seeing half of what's washing up onto the beaches. But yeah, like Lucy said, it's the conversation around it that's important. 15 years ago in Australia, when Heidi, who runs Tangaroa Blue, the other organisation we're fundraising for, when she was attending conferences and talking about marine debris and this marine debris that was washing up on our beaches, people thought she was talking about logs and driftwood, because they didn't know about plastics in the ocean. And it's getting better. People are starting to hear about it more, but everyone needs to know that this is what's happening in our society, and it's a direct result of what we're asking for in our supermarkets and
it's
like
working.
That.
Like it's working, you know, like there's entire countries that are banning plastic bags. Our state that we live in back home has just done that. We're getting container deposit schemes. But there's also, you know, big things around like, what do we do with all our recycling now that China's not taking our recycling? We should probably figure that out, because that's true for Australia, Canada, America, and the United Kingdom. You can imagine how much recycling that is. And China looked after most of that, but they can't take anymore. So, yeah, it's working, but we still have a lot of work to do. But, the conversations and that advocacy is what really matters. So, yeah, even if you just gave up one thing and then got everyone else you know to give up that one thing and had those conversations, that would be just as impacting.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Mine's a silly question.
No silly questions.
You said that you saw a bear one day when you went to camp. I would like to hear about that, please.
Okay, so yeah, we were staying in this beautiful cabin called the Sunshine Cabin in Aliva Bay, just north of the border. And there's this like stream by it. And I remember when I went to the bathroom earlier that morning, I saw some deer by the creek. And I was like, okay, I'm really going to carry my bear spray everywhere, because if there's deer and there's a creek, there's probably bears too. And I got to the stage where I was going down to pack my kayaks. It was the only time I didn't leave the cabin with my bear spray. And I had my arms like, we hate making 2 trips. So you should see us when we're going to pack our kayaks. You're like, and you've got like every imaginable thing dangling off you. And I was looking at my feet because I was going down some rocky steps. And there was like a front of bushes here. And I think just as I came down the steps, these 2 bears, a mother and a cub black bear, came round the corner at the same time. I was looking at my feet and all I heard was this like, moo! And I was like, I looked up and there was this baby bear just like scared out of its mind, and I was like, ba 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 ba. Mathilde was like on the patio just above me, and luckily the baby bear just like turned around and took off into the bushes, and mum bear was like, you know when you see an exasperated parent like, oh, I've got to go chase the toddler again, turned around and like waddled after its baby. And I was just like, you know, some people have flight or fight. I don't have either of those things. I just have stutter and stare. I was just like, ba da ba ba da ba 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 ba, and yeah, it was pretty scary. Mathilde was like, do you want your bear spray?
Is that what you're trying to say right now? Do you want this?
So it was, they were about maybe 8 to 10 meters away from me when we came to see each other. So, but you know, in Alaska, hunting, you guys have a hunting ban on grizzlies in BC, which is amazing. We went to an incredible talk by the Rain Coast Conservation Organisation here in BC, who are doing a Conserving Carnivores project where they're trying to buy all the hunting for carnivores, hunting licenses, so that there's not this massive die-off of the carnivorous predators on your coast. But definitely in Alaska, the bears are much more afraid of people. Probably because they get shot, you know. And it was kind of upsetting times. We would stay in cabins, and you're used to reading a cabin log and being like, oh, nature, it's so nice, we all love nature. And we like read these cabin logs in Alaska. It's like, shot 5 deer today, it was great. And we were like, what do you do with 5 deer? Like, that's enough to feed an entire town.
Everyone in Alaska has a limit of 2 bears per year, per person.
Yeah. So, yeah. But yeah, so...
But we did see more bears in Alaska than we have down here.
It's confusing times. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so thank you very much for your fantastic talk, and it's really fantastic to hear all about your trip. So, and thanks everybody for coming. Yeah.
And sorry, I forgot to say, this is we have successfully raised over $20,000 now for the Tangaroa Blue Foundation and the Living Ocean Society. That money goes to the cleanups and the work that they do, but fundraising's still open till midday tomorrow. So if you feel like giving a little more, that is what helps support these changes that we're advocating for. But we always say, if you don't have any money, speak with your actions, and that's just as meaningful, being penniless students for quite some time ourselves. But yeah, also thanks to Ruth for helping us organise all this, and to everyone for coming. We'll be around for a bit if you want to ask more questions outside. So don't be shy.
Thanks very much.
much, Ava.
Very welcome.